All right, there we go. Hello everyone, how's it going? Team here, and this is BxJS Weekly, episode 130, bringing you all the best JavaScript news of the week in a podcast form. And yeah, I not even sure what's going on, but we don't really have that many things to talk about. I mean, there's a decent amount of libs and demos, but not that many articles and news. But anyway, you know what? Let's just get started. Why not? As usual, the first section of the podcast is getting started, and we have 5 articles here today. Hey Swarlow, welcome to the stream. All right, the first article is Node.js shebang or shebang. I'm not sure how you correctly read this because I've never actually had to pronounce it out loud. I believe it's a shebang, hashbang. Yeah, hashbang sounds a bit better. I think it's easier to pronounce. Anyhow, so you have to use the shebang in your Node file or JavaScript files, I guess, that you want to run as a binary, right? If you watched my GraphQL framework stream, you know that we did that for our bin file. You have to actually add it to allow the Unix system to understand what to use to run the current file to interpret it with, right? And normally you would just put the node in there, which is usually the absolute path to your node file, but the problem is that, it doesn't actually work all the time because the absolute installation path can be different for different operating systems or even different users. So there's an env command that basically helps you for that. And then the article just deep dives into this env command and what can you actually do with it. How can you pass the arguments if you want to, like for example experimental flags, or how you can even do stuff like, run the TypeScript like this. So you can pass the TS node, for example, and it will work, considering you have the TS node installed, of course. So if you are thinking about writing the command line tools with Node.js and you were not aware of the shebang or hashbang, this worked, then do check this article out. It does a pretty good job of explaining how does this thing works together with env and how it can help save you some time. All right, next thing we got here is, what is wrong with my dev tool? There we go. Next thing we got here is the Mastering Hard Parts of JavaScript series. This is actually 17-part series, so there's 17 articles here that in quite a lot of details talk about such things as callbacks, closures, asynchronicity in general, and then prototypes and classes. So those are sort of 4 core things of JavaScript that are, I would agree that those are the hardest part probably, so it will take quite some time to wrap your head around those. It certainly did for me. I think I've used them for probably 3 or 4 years without really understanding how the hell do they work until it finally clicked for me and I started kind of using it consciously, I guess. But coming back to the articles, those are really, really good. So if you are just getting started with JavaScript, or if you've been working with it for quite some time, but you still don't quite get the callbacks, closures, asynchronicity in general, or prototypes and classes, then I would absolutely recommend looking through this and, trying to figure out, maybe this will help you understand all of those things. Hey Tosun, welcome to the stream. All right, continuing, we got an introduction to testing in JavaScript. Another great article. So this one is not a series, it's just one really large article, which might as well be a series to be honest. But this is sort of all-in-one intro to testing. And it basically covers everything you ever want to know about getting started with tests, going from, from type of tests, what kind of things do you usually test, what kind of things does the testing frameworks have, what is the life cycles, what is the testing architectures, and so on and so forth. And then it goes into a tutorial with Jest, which starts with pretty basic stuff, like testing your function, and then goes into more complex things like matchers, mocking, and so on and so forth. So if you want to get started with testing and you weren't sure where exactly do you begin, then do check this article out. Maybe this is exactly what you were looking for. All right, next thing we got here is GraphQL the simple way, or don't use Apollo. So this is kind of, I wouldn't call it controversial, but essentially the gist is the Apollo GraphQL, while it is very easy to set up, it does have a whole ton of things in the background that can be very hard to understand if you're just getting started with GraphQL and just want to play around with GraphQL itself without actually relying on ton of underlying things that might alter your experience, such as, the advanced caching and all that kind of stuff that is really fancy and really cool to have in production, but might actually hinder you if you are just getting started and just might confuse you basically, right? So this article essentially makes this point and says, okay, so instead of using Apollo server specifically, so this talks about creating a GraphQL server, just go with a basic package such as Express GraphQL and just use that to set up your GraphQL API in a super simple way and use that to serve your schema and run your queries, right? And it also shows how to set up the real-time subscriptions with it. Amusingly enough, it actually uses subscription transport VES, which I believe is actually a GraphQL package. The Apollo package. Yes, it is. Which nonetheless, it's a great package and it actually is pretty universal. So you can use it with any server and it works pretty well, but it's just, it's tiny, amusing tidbit. Nonetheless, it's a pretty good article that does a really nice job of walking you through setting up the very basic GraphQL server and seeing how that works, basically. So if you are curious, do check it out. Again, if you want to set up GraphQL server in a nicer way without actually building schema yourself, check out my older video on doing that with GraphQL. GraphQL Compose is what the name of the framework is, because it makes it incredibly easy. Anyway. Continuing, we got designing a JavaScript plugin system. So this is a very, very basic level tutorial that teaches you how to build your own plugin system for your thing. In this case, it just goes with a pretty basic calculator and just shows you how you can extend it with plugins. But I guess the core principles apply to just about anything. So yeah, I think this article would only be useful for people who are just getting started and are still confused as to how you design something like plugins. If you never tried to do that, this is a pretty good read. If you already know how that works, then, well, you won't really find anything new here. But there we go. This was getting started section. Now we are coming to the articles and news. We only got one today here, unfortunately, but it's a really good one. So this is from the TensorFlow folks, and TensorFlow folks is what I'm trying to say, from TensorFlow.js blog. And the article is titled Supercharging the TensorFlow.js WebAssembly backend with SIMD and multi-threading. So I've heard about WebAssembly SIMD, right? I think we already talked about it on BxJS Weekly a couple of times, and I believe it's now stage 3 or something in terms of proposals, and is supported behind the flags in Chrome at least. Not sure about the Firefox, but I think I've only briefly read somewhere that multi-threading in WebAssembly is planned, but apparently it's already implemented, again, behind the flags and everything. I think it's stage 2 proposal right now, and it's kind of mind-blowing what you can do with that. So the folks at TensorFlow basically decided to modify their WebAssembly backend to support and use both SIMD and WebAssembly threads, and try to measure the difference between the different platforms and different versions of WebAssembly. So here specifically, they took 4 backends, right? WebGL, WebAssembly with SIMD, and WebAssembly with SIMD and threads. And those charts are insane. I find it interesting that actually the plain WebAssembly is in some cases slower than the WebGL implementation on, again, some models. So it's not in general, but there are some models like this MobileNet V2, for example, where the WebGL actually performs better than plain WebAssembly, which is kind of curious. But WebAssembly with SIMD and threads blows everything out of the water. Like, improvements are just insane. It's like up to 6 times speed up, I believe, in some cases, which is just crazy. And if you look at especially, lower tier devices, so they test on Pixel 4 here. Unfortunately, it doesn't yet support WebAssembly threads, but it do support WebAssembly and SIMD. And you can see that improvement is just mind-blowing. So they went from like 170 milliseconds down to 60-70 milliseconds. So it's like 100 milliseconds shaved off just by enabling SIMD backend. And if you look at the devices that support threads, you can see that it basically gives, I don't know, what is the difference here? I guess about 40-50% more speed than just SIMD, which is again crazy, but I guess it's expected, right? So it's threads, and if you utilize them correctly, you're gonna gain some significant boost there. Yeah, for the Blaze face model, it's not as drastic, the difference between the simmed and threads, but still quite impressive. Like, the changes here are just insane. I'm really curious to see how this will work on the, again, lower tier devices such as Pixel 4 once the mobile version of Chrome starts supporting the threads for WebAssembly. Again, I'm surprised that that's a thing and they're already working. There is a lot more technical details in here, so if you want, you can check it out. There's also the write up about the simmed and multi-threading proposals. So as I said, simmed is currently phase 3 and available in Chrome origin trials, Chrome 8486, which means that you have to explicitly enable it. Firefox Nightly also supports simmed, it seems. That is nice. So only nightly for now. And then multi-threading is stage 2. Okay, yeah. And okay, it's available in Chrome Desktop, which is since version 74. So it's been a while actually since they made it available. Interesting. I didn't know that. That's kind of cool. But yeah, if you are interested in WebAssembly or maybe in TensorFlow and you wanted to run your models with some, just look at this stuff. So if you take WebAssembly, right, and just run your TensorFlow and WebAssembly on MacBook Pro 15 2019, which is a relatively powerful machine, right? You, like, the mobile net 2 takes 100 milliseconds to execute. And then if you throw in the simmed and threads, it cuts down to like 10 milliseconds, which is just insane. Like, look at this performance difference. Very exciting, by the way, is what I want to say. Yeah, that's basically it. So if you're curious about more technical details, make sure to read the article. It's just fascinating. I'm really, really curious to see how this all develops. But there we go. This is all for articles and news for today. Unfortunately, only one thing here. And yeah, even though it's really exciting, just one article. Now we're coming to the tips, tricks, and bit-sized awesomeness. We also have only one thing here today, and it's not directly JavaScript related, I guess, but it's a news from GitHub. They are officially launching the GitHub container registry. So they released the GitHub packages last year, which allowed you to actually publish stuff to GitHub as packages for, well, NPM, Docker, Maven, whatever you can imagine. Basically, I think they supported almost everything. And Docker was there, but it wasn't like a real registry. It was just basically a package storage, and it wasn't very nice to use it. So now they are introducing a proper container registry where you could basically publish and consume containers from, and it's going to be completely free for public images, which is amazing, especially considering the changes that the company recently announced for the official Docker registry. There are some slightly silly limitations on the public images. It's like, if you want to publish anything and you don't pull it for 6 months, it's basically going to be deleted, which is, I mean, I guess it's okay for very popular images, but something that is not very popular, I'm guessing is going to get either migrated to GitHub or just die silently. This, like, specifically, I want to say that the Docker company decision is really bad, or was really badly accepted in the scientific community, because scientists now use the Docker more and more to publish the reproducible versions of the tools that you can just, run yourself and check the results. And as you might imagine, it's a scientific community is pretty tiny, so not a lot of people use that, which means that the images rarely get pulled, which means that if there's a 6 months downtime, which of course might happen, you never know when you stumble upon an interesting article and go back to check the code, it might just not be there. But now that we have the GitHub registry, that might be a good thing. So I imagine people will start using this a lot more. I'm thinking about putting Exaframe on there because, yeah, I don't really like the new rules. But yeah. If I'm not mistaken, Figma is already using WebAssembly. Oh yeah, they do. They've been using it from basically whenever it was like generally available in all the browsers. They just started using the WebAssembly to speed up the logic, which seems to work pretty well for them. I mean, I use Figma to, for example, make my thumbnails for this channel, and it works pretty damn well. So it's a really nice tool. Anyway, continuing, we got the releases section. There is 4 of them here. The first one being Bootstrap Icons version 1.0. So the next version of Bootstrap is coming, and they are sort of splitting it into separate things. One of those things is Bootstrap Icons, and it's a collection that contains more than 1,100 icons and is now available as NPM package, or you can just download SVGs if you want. There's also a set of icons for Figma that you can just throw into your Figma and just use it there, which is quite convenient. So if you were looking for a really comprehensive icon set, that is, well, let's be honest, is quite generic, so it's not really gonna stand out and make your app stand out. But, you know, if you just want to use some icons, this seems like a really great thing to use. I'm really hoping the React icons will add that as a sub package, because all of those are SVGs, and if you add them in a tree shakeable manner, it doesn't really matter if there's 1,000 or 2,000 icons. So it's quite damn nice. Nice icons, but missed. I mean, web fonts. Why would you want a web font where you can have SVGs? Like, web font is not tree shakeable, right? If you include the web font, you drag all of those thousands of icons, which means you're gonna have a web font which is, I don't know how big, like megabyte or something. Why would you want that when you can have like a 3, 4, 5 icons in SVG format and everything else is just thrown away, and 3, 4 icons in SVG format is just a couple of, well, okay, kilobytes, maybe not bytes, but kilobytes. And, you know, if you gzip it, it's going to be super tiny. I am not a fan of web fonts. Let me just put it this way. Unless you have a, like, the thing is that if you use a web font, you will have to create a custom build that only includes your icons anyway, if you want to optimize for size, right? So it sounds like a pain in the ass, to be honest. I do prefer SVG approach a lot more. Anyway, continuing, we got Cypress version 5.1 release. Along with other interesting feature that it has, I want to highlight one thing, is that they now have experimental full network stybing support, finally. So if you ever try to use Cypress, you know that there's a problem with basically trying to intercept the fetch requests. Cypress does allow you to intercept the XML HTTP requests, so XHR requests, but it didn't work on fetch, so they introduced the fetch interception, and now they finally introduced the cyroute2 method that basically allows you to intercept and modify and wait on any HTTP request originating from your app, which is fantastic. So I no longer have to do any hacks or wait for requests or whatever. I can actually just use this thing to basically make sure I wait for the responses from my server without polyfilling stuff or hacking around limitations, which is kind of awesome. So if you're using Cypress, this is a thing to be excited about, and do check it out. Let me check the chat. Using only intranet web, not thinking too much about. Oh yeah, I mean, if you're using intranet, sure, that doesn't matter too much. But I mean, even if you're using intranet, it's still nicer when your app is smaller because it's going to be a lot faster to render, right? So I will still take SVG icons over web fonts. Anyway, coming back to the releases, we got Tailwind CSS version 1.8.0. that adds a bunch of new features, including font variant numeric, which looks very nice. And my favorite, dark modes in currently experimental, but it's basically just one flag to flip on the dark mode for Tailwind app, which honestly looks really damn good. So you just say dark media, and then that's basically it. You get the dark variant, and then you can define the colors, and you're good. Which honestly looks really damn cool. So I am quite excited about that, and looking forward to seeing how that develops into a stable feature. There's also a bunch of other utilities that, you know, and helpers and stuff like this. So if you're using Tailwind, make sure to check that upgrade and update, because it will, it's also smaller if I remember correctly. So this is another reason to upgrade. So there we go. All right, next thing we got here is NativeScript 7.0 that basically is finally migrated to ES 2017 with ES modules and a bunch of other features. Now uses the new config format and new V8 iOS engine, and there's a bunch of other changes. Now, the thing is that I don't think I've actually ever talked about NativeScript on this podcast or on the channel in general. But I personally find it very interesting, and looking at the version 7.0, I might want to revisit that. So the gist is this is sort of very similar to the way React Native works, but done in a bit different manner, right? So, and before they had their own sort of UI framework that you had to use that was not very nice, and that was like one of the reasons that I basically, you know, tried it out and was annoying and I just dropped it. But now they actually allow you to use Angular, React, Vue, or whatever the hell you want to run the, to build the UI, right? So they have their own components. I'm not sure why they're using these dollars to build the JSX, but they even support JSX, so you can like write full-on React components, and it just works, which is kind of cool. Now, the cool thing about it is not this, like this is great and everything, but my favorite thing that they did was, where is it? Was marshalling, basically. So what they did is something similar to what you have in Xamarin, for example. Where is the marshalling description? I'm pretty sure they had it somewhere. Tooling? Is it in tooling? Come on, where's... I'm pretty sure it was somewhere here. Technical overview, no. NativeScript plugins, CLI, modules. Where is Android runtime? Oh yeah, there you go, marshalling. Right, so the gist is they use marshalling to allow you to literally invoke any Android or iOS, Java or Objective-C or, you know, Swift classes by writing JavaScript. And this is incredibly cool. This basically means that you can write your UI in React right now, right? And then if you have some platform-specific functionality that is not yet bound to the whatever plugin they expose, so they have their own API, obviously, you can literally just call the Android dot whatever the Java classes are and invoke that to, I don't know, control the GPS or whatever, right? I'm pretty sure those are already all covered, but if there's any obscure APIs that are not yet exposed, you can just literally call it from JavaScript, which at a time was like, looked really cool. I really wished the React Native would do that, but you know, I guess this is out of their scope. But now I guess you can use NativeScript with React Native, with React, which is pretty damn interesting. So I might want to revisit that. I used for a prototype with Vue 2 years ago. It's good. Used because I need Bluetooth. Oh, okay, nice. I mean, I've tried it a couple of years ago. It was okay-ish, but you know, like a bit cumbersome. But the marshalling feature really looked like very, very cool to me. I don't know how useful that will be in comparison to like React Native plugins or whatever, which, you know, is again not too hard to set up, but yeah, anyhow. Almost forgot NativeScript existed. Yeah, it disappears from the, I think it pops up on my radar every like couple of years, I guess, and I just like, oh yeah, that exists, let me just check what they do. But seems like they are doing pretty well, like stable updates, some nice like TypeScript support and everything. Looks pretty nice. So if you are working on mobile apps, do check it out. Maybe this is the thing that will help you quite a bit. Anyhow, continuing, we got Libs and demos section. We do have quite a few of them here today, starting with a tool called Remember. This is an Electron app that allows you to make notes, or not just Electron app. This is the cool bit. You can actually run it both as Electron app if you want to, or as a locally hosted or remotely hosted note-taking tool that kind of reminds me of Notion, I guess, but in a more, I wouldn't call it structure, but sort of different way to structure the notes, essentially. It's a very nice looking, supports themes, and supports rich editing with like tables and checkboxes and whatever you can imagine. Built on React, open source, and looks pretty damn nice. So if you are curious and if you have your own database of, you know, for note taking or whatever, do check it out. Maybe this is a thing that you would like to use. All right, continuing, we got fastest-levenshtein because fast-levenshtein wasn't fast enough apparently. So this is the Levenshtein distance module that is sort of the fastest JavaScript implementation of the algorithm. And it also is basically built in a way that works in Deno. So you can use it in both Node and Deno, which is quite nice. And if you look at the benchmarks here, it really is like the fastest. So it's like almost 2 times faster than just about everything else out there, which is pretty damn impressive, to be honest. So there you go. If you need to measure the Levenshtein distance, then maybe pick this module. All right, next thing we got here is brahmos, supercharged JavaScript library with modern React API and native templates, which is the most vague description I've ever read and tells me nothing. Anyway, this is a library for building front ends, right? It's React-like, and the features are basically lightweight and fast. It has the same sort of API and JSX syntax as React, but it does not use the VDOM. And this is sort of the selling point of it. So it's sort of like, hey, we are React, but without VDOM. We just render stuff directly in the page. Looks fine. And the cool thing is that it actually supports stuff like suspense lazy and suspense for data fetch and even concurrent mode already, which is like ahead of React. I wonder how exactly that works. And what is the difference with the React concurrent mode? But yeah, it would be very interesting to see some sort of a benchmarks or comparison, I guess, with React in terms of performance and in terms of the use cases that the brahmos fits to, rather than, when would you pick brahmos instead of React, for example? Because I'm pretty sure it's the same situation as with the Preact, for example, right? Which excels in some cases and then loses to React in others. But nonetheless, it's an interesting project. I wish it would have had a bit better description. But there you go. All right, that was brahmos. So if you're curious, do check it out. Next thing we got here is object model, strong dynamically typed object modeling for JavaScript. So this is dynamic type checking essentially for JavaScript in a pretty small package, just under 4 kilobytes min zipped. And yeah, has a pretty nice API. So essentially allows you to describe your object model and then validate it on runtime in a pretty convenient way, I guess. And it also throws type errors, which means that you can probably tap it into your Babel, or probably there is a Babel plugin. It looks like there is a Babel plugin, to be honest. Is there a Babel plugin? Yeah, okay, yeah, no, Babel, blah, blah, blah. No, there is no. It feels like it could be a Babel plugin that would essentially do that on the compile time, to just verify everything. It uses ES6 proxies, so keep that in mind, which means it's not compatible with the older browsers. So if you need some type checking during the runtime, do check this one out. Next thing we got here is react-use-pip, the React hook for picture-in-picture. So if you want to have a website that has some picture-in-picture for content, I believe right now it's still just picture-in-picture. So the browsers still only support picture-in-picture for videos only, but there is a proposal to allow picture-in-picture for arbitrary content, which I think is pretty cool. So it'd be nice to have some floating widgets. But yeah, it's a pretty nice playing media. Yeah, okay, so it's for media only for now. But anyway, if you are interested in doing picture-in-picture in React and just wanted some nice and convenient hook, do check this one out. All right, continuing, we got Joist, a small 2 kilobyte library to help with creation of web components and web component-based applications. So it's yet another web component-based framework. Looks fine. Like, yeah, I mean, I should really get around doing some web component based stuff, but nearly done with the Graffiti GraphQL framework. So we can actually start with that web components application that I wanted to start with Hasura, but was like, okay, it lacks XYZ. So I started actually building my own framework. But anyway, if you are interested in web components, check Joist out. Maybe this is a thing that you were looking for. Okay, next thing is Stitches, which is the modern styling library, near zero runtime, server-side rendering, multivariant support, and best-in-class developer experience, as they claim on a website. It is essentially CSS and JS with some additional features and sort of aims to be as low overhead and as fast as possible. There is packages for React. I believe it only supports React right now, it seems. I don't see any mentions of Vue or Svelte or anything else. But if you are working a lot with CSS and JS and you are not happy about the current solutions, maybe check Stitches out. Maybe this is exactly what you wanted. I thought this one was interesting. Yeah, I mean, it definitely looks interesting, but I am not using CSS and JS too much. I'm mostly using Tailwind, and, this just looks weird to me after Tailwind, basically. Anyway, continuing, we got vscode-debug-visualizer, an extension for VS Code that visualizes data during debugging. So this is sort of a helper extension. If you debug your app from the VS Code, it allows you to not just view the data as you would normally have in a debugger, but it actually visualizes the data in a graph manner and allows you to see the transitions from one state to another, which could be helpful in some cases, but I guess in my head that's not very like I do not see that many cases where that would actually be handy, but it's a really nice demo, I guess. So there we go. Okay. Next thing we got here is vue-to-react. Try to transform Vue components to React components, a tool that basically rewrites your existing Vue components into React components. Currently, it rewrites into the React class components, so keep that in mind if you want to migrate to React and use hooks. But yeah, you know, if you have some Vue app and you, for whatever reason, decided to switch to React and you don't want to rewrite everything by hand, which is completely understandable, do check this tool out. Seems pretty nice. Like, yeah, might help you migrate things. Again, not sure, you know, if you are doing changes as drastic as switching from one framework to another, it might be a good idea to just literally rewrite everything because you already know what your UI is, and then you might optimize something, catch some bugs and stuff like this, essentially. But anyway. Continuing, we got Pasukon, the JavaScript practical parser generator library using combinators. So yeah, it just says it's a parser generator using combinators. Seems nice. So if you're working with parsers and you need to generate a lot of parsers, or maybe you are working on your own parser and you just wanted something that will generate it for you, do check it out. It seems to be pretty decent. This is completely out of my area of expertise. I think I've written 2 or 3 parser syntaxes by using the existing generators, which already broke my head, even though the syntaxes were super straightforward. But yeah, that's the thing that exists and seems pretty nice. So if you were looking for parser generator, do check this one out. It also has the online editor where you can just play around with it if you want to. Continuing, we got kiss-orm, an extremely simple and explicit ORM for TypeScript. So yeah, this is, another ORM. Seems to be based on the SQL queries and essentially variables that you pass around to it using the, what do you call them? What do you call those backticks? God damn it, I forgot the name of it. Template literals is what I want to say, right? So you just pass in template literals, pass in the variables there, and the template literal syntax does everything for you, essentially. Seems to be the SQL based, looking at the queries. So if you were looking for yet another ORM, do check this one out. Maybe this is simple enough for you to use. All right, continuing, we got Chromogen, a UI-driven jest test generation package for recoil selectors. I think this is probably the coolest one this week. So essentially, this is an extension / set of tools that allows you to automatically generate jest tests for your React recoil state. So if you're using the recoil state management in React library and you are using this Chromogen set of tools, so you have to inject the observer into your app, and then you have to install the Chrome extension, right? And then you literally just use your app and you will get the tests that are generated for you for your recoil selectors, which is super cool, to be honest. So if you're using recoil as the state management and you wanted at least some level of automation for your tests, do check it out. This seems like a really neat tool. All right. And the last thing we got here is Temper, state management for React made simple. Yet another state management library. This one seems to be relying on traits, and yeah, it's just like basically a set of hooks. Seems fine. Like, I don't know why would I pick that over just using context, for example. Not sure. Doesn't really explain why would you use Temper instead of context or Redux or recoil. What are the advantages? Newish libraries tend to do that and never explain why the hell would I use that instead of anything else that looks the same. But anyway, that's the thing. It exists. So if you were looking for a different state management solution for React, do check this one out. Right, that's it for the libs and demos. Now we have interesting and silly stuff. We have one repo here that is titled unmaintainable-code, and this is essentially a collection of tips on how to write unmaintainable code, which is just perfect. Like, some of those tips are great, and reading through that, about half of them, probably more, apply to me. So I used to do that. And essentially, if you flip it backwards, it's a collection of tips on, you know, how to actually write good code and how not to write code, right? But anyway, it's really great. So if you're curious, do check it out. It is a very long list, and there's a lot of tips here. So keep that in mind. But if you have like 10-20 minutes to go through that, do check it out. It is not tied to a specific language, so it talks about a lot of languages here, but just I think a lot of that applies to just about any languages out there. All right, that's actually it from my side. So this is it. If you guys have any questions, suggestions, you have a few minutes to throw them into the chat right now. As usual, you can find all the mentioned links on the GitHub or bxjs.dev once it updates. You can join our Discord server to chat about anything JavaScript or video games. You can follow me on Twitter for random retweets from JavaScript community and occasional thoughts from me on stuff. You can follow the Telegram channel we have for BxJS Weekly, where I essentially collect all the links over the week. There is usually a bit more than what is in a podcast because I filter out the things that I don't think are interesting enough to get in here, basically. So if you want to read all of them, follow the Telegram. And I think that's basically it. Yeah, as usual, if you missed any of that, the VOD will be available immediately on YouTube or on Twitch. And you can also listen this in like audio podcast form in on whatever, Spotify, iTunes. I think it should be basically everywhere. So there you go. Like the Remember app a lot. Cool. Yeah, I mean, it does look very nice. So that's definitely well deserved, I think. All right. Doesn't seem like we have any more questions or suggestions. So once again, thank you guys very much for your support. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing your links with me. I wish you awesome rest of the weekend or rest of the week if you're watching the VOD of this. And I see you next Wednesday for the development.